I think for years I treated delegation as like handing off tasks that I didn't want to do. The breakthrough for me was realizing that delegation is about transferring ownership, not work.
Ever feel like you're the bottleneck in your own business? On Scale Smart, Grow Fast, we talk a lot about growth, but growth usually breaks down when the owner can't let go. It's something we see and help with all the time at Workogenics, where our full-time executive assistants help leaders create the consistent execution that delegation requires. And today's guest knows all about this. Chad Bauer transformed a 60-year-old family advertising agency into a modern, data-driven growth firm, but only after doing the hard work of learning to delegate himself. He is the president and owner of SRB Advertising, and let's get into it. Thanks for joining me, Chad.
Thanks for having me, Adrienne. Looking forward to our conversation today.
So, Chad, my understanding is you took this agency over from your father. And when you did that, what did you think about where the business was and where it needed to change?
When I came on, Adrienne, to the firm, I came on just to be a worker and really kind of just have my head down to help some account management, some new business development, and just driving revenue to the firm. It was kind of like almost like a grace or a trial period to determine if this was, going to be the future that I wanted to invest in. I had previous experiences owning small businesses when I was younger and then worked in the corporate world and quickly learned that, the corporate world just wasn't for me. I was not cut to play that game for much longer. So I had approached my father about coming on board and he said, I can't pay you what you're making, but the long-term opportunity's there. I don't have an exit strategy. I don't know what I'm going to do with this thing in the future. And if you like it, the opportunity, could be yours. So in the first, I'd say 4 to 6 years, call it 5 years or so, I just had my head down, grinding, bringing new revenue to the firm, upselling, cross-selling existing clients with new opportunities and ways in which we could help them grow their business or achieve their goals. And then as I kind of felt, the comfortability coming in the fold and really enjoying what I was doing, that's when my father and I sat down and started talking about the legacy of the agency, the future, the transition, the buyout, the financial side of it, all that stuff. And there was a number of years of planning to get that to the finish line. However, over those years, he did involve me in a lot more operational responsibilities and tasks, managing the team, seeing projects from start to finish, things that I wasn't necessarily maybe tied to in the first 5 years that I was here. And at that time, that's when I started to really realize, knowing that I was going to buy the company from him and that it was going to be my future. That's when I really started to observe, certain things about the operation that even though I grew up around the agency and had, known about it my whole life, I wasn't aware of the inner working. And so once I really got my hands involved in the inner workings, that's when I started to really understand the flow of work, how our team, interacted with each other cross-departmentally, how we dealt with our vendors was a big, eye-opener for me. And as I got into those relationships and understanding that more, that's where I really started to gain clarity about, okay, these are kind of the, the core elements and facets of our business that we need to hang on to and remain true to, not just for, the success of the business, but for the legacy of our name and the 60 years of history that we've been riding on. So some of those things were very tangible and very specific, and others weren't. Others were more, hey, we've been doing it these way for these types of reasons, but with growth as a major goal of mine to get it to the next level, we needed to change the way that we were doing things to support that growth. And so working alongside him for those handful of years after I had been here really allowed me to lean into how things were working and ultimately to decide, okay, moving forward, if growth is our goal, these are the things we want to keep, we want to maintain, we want to continue as we build the company and continue to instill in our culture. And here's some other things that we need to either, completely do away with or revamp and change to support our future goals in the direction that we were going in.
Right. I'd love to hear a couple of the things that you really wanted to preserve as they were, even through this transition.
Yeah, for sure. One thing that we, was immediately noticeable, and not just from growing up around it and, being at the dinner table when I was younger and hearing my father talk about business and stuff like that. It really had to do with seeing the numbers, right? Getting into our books and understanding the financials and understanding the relationships that each account or client had with the firm. The biggest thing was our customer retention. The firm was retaining and is currently still retaining about 94% of our business annually. And I think that there are, as I came to find, reasons for that. Yes, we deliver results, and yes, we deliver our work, on time, under budget, you know what I mean? All the important things. But it really had to do with the relationships and what we call, our account management or customer service, how we communicate, how we instilled ourselves as almost an extension of the team of a lot of our clients. Instead of being this vendor, a lot of clients call us partners. And as I really kind of dove into that and focused on that, it became clear that that was a major sticking point for why we've been successful, why we've been around for so long, and why we've been able to retain the business that we have. And so that was immediately probably the first thing I said, we don't need to change any of that. We might have to change the cadence in which we communicate depending upon, the scale of the work that we're doing for the clients. But the style, the genuineness, the focus on caring for our clients, achieving their goals or getting a deliverable across the finish line and holding their hands, educating them along the way if and when they needed it, informing them, in advance of maybe a speed bump that we might, foresee down the road, and just communicating. I know it sounds sort of surface level and, common sense, but it was the catalyst for the success of this firm for a long, long time and will continue to be as we grow. That was a big
Awesome.
thing. I think another thing I'd add to that would be just how we work together as a team internally. My father never led the firm as like a sweatshop grind, 9 to 5 and, give us overtime hours on weekends and things like that. And that allowed us to retain a lot of really good talent. And so naturally, as I'm sure you'd imagine, you transition ownership, there's new people running the show. That does tend to cause some, ripples in the water with regards to the staff and people wondering, well, what's the future and what's my future going to look like with, the son of the previous owner coming in here. And we've always had a very, very tight knit team. And that was another thing that we wanted to keep together. So that caused me to have to communicate a little bit more, comment or a little bit more regularly with the staff about what my goals are, where we want to get this firm to get everybody kind of bought in. So retaining talent was also another a big thing that was something I wanted to continue to do, and we have been able to for the last 7-8 years. Hang on to some really good people.
Awesome. Now, what were a couple things that you realized needed to change?
Gosh, I could talk about that. Not that there was a ton of stuff, but there's reasons to it. One of the things that I'd say the biggest thing from the top down, right, from a leadership perspective, my father was a true owner operator, right? So as he built and grew this firm from the late 80s into the 2010s, he was at the focal point and the center point of everything, right? So if we needed to go out and pitch a prospect, he'd be the one that would, develop the concepts of the ideas and the pitch and go out and pitch it and sell it and then come back. And he might delegate, some creative work to some designers and things like that. But he'd write maybe a script for a radio or TV, spot. He'd go and negotiate the media with, the media schedule and the buy with those media outlets. He would cross compare, or analyze the invoicing when it would come over to make sure that, we got on the media exactly what we ordered. He'd be back out in front of the client presenting the creative. And, he touched everything. And there was nothing wrong with that. Adrienne, like looking back on it, now, even after these years of being here in the role that I'm in, is like, wow, like really respect the hustle and really respect how he did it. But my father had different goals than I do. And that was a big opening eye moment. Yes, I've always believed in him. We've always had a great relationship. I watched him build this thing and grew up around it. But he got this thing to a level that he was very comfortable with in terms of revenue, in terms of the staff and headcount, in terms of, supporting them and their paychecks on a week to week basis. And my goals were to grow. I want to get this thing to another level. And in order to do that, being an owner operator becomes extremely, extremely challenging. I needed to start to understand that I needed to be more to the firm than the person that was, touching everything and pointing in the directions of where everything needed to go. I needed to be a little bit more strategic about how I looked at the operation and determine, maybe where some of our strengths were and where our weaknesses lie. That really caused me to have to do a lot of self-reflection. I took a number of different assessments through the advisement of some advisors that I work with. And things like the Colby profile and the Strength Finders assessment, like that felt like I knew a lot about myself and I was confident in what I'm confident in, and not so much with other things. But those assessments really allowed me to identify what true value I brought to the business.
Mhm.
And if I were able to then focus on that, what I bring from a value proposition perspective to the business the most, then I can
Right.
start to plan for the addition of resources, both people, tools, or technology to support the other areas that I may have been involved in. So I was involved in everything from the strategy to the creative to the execution. And I'm like, yeah, we're getting good business, but all of them are referrals, right? We're getting a referral after this project. We're getting a recommendation after this project. That's great. But as you know, you can't plan for growth purely based on referral business. So going through those assessments, understanding myself a little bit better helped me realize, okay, my true strengths lied in my relationships, my network, my ability to go out and foster relationships with people, build rapport, and turn them into clients for the shop. In order to do that, I needed to really free up a lot of my time that was being spent managing accounts, reviewing performance, developing strategy, things like that. And that was probably one of the biggest eye-opening moments for me since I've taken over and been doing this. And so that then allowed me to plan, all right, I need resources to lead the creative team. I need resources to lead our strategy, right? And fast forward to today, we've got managers and leadership roles now within the firm that aren't just the owner, right? We've got departments and we've
Right.
got leaders of those departments that are allowing me to delegate a lot of the work that I was spending at least 20 to 30 hours a week on, 3 years ago. Now that's on somebody else's plate. And those people have come in with experience, whether they be agency or brand side, marketing experience, whatever, that the specific role is called for. And now I've kind of got a team to be able to, again, delegate those things to, but also rely on when they can throw their hat in the ring to say, hey, Chad, I know you're pitching this client, or, we're working on trying to develop a creative concept for this client. I can help you in these areas. Let me help you with this, that, and the third. And that was a big thing that had to change in order for us to achieve our goals. I'll wrap up by saying if the desire was to just take over and kind of ride the coattails of what my father had been doing, probably wouldn't have had to change much because he had a really good thing going. There was nothing broken, there weren't any shortfalls or major gaps. He could just continue to ride that and work with the same type of clients that he had typically worked with historically, and probably done just fine. But that growth and that desire to get this place to the next level, work with another tier, another class of brands and clientele, it all needed to start with kind of that self-reflection of myself, understanding the strengths, and then, finding people that are smarter than me at the things I'm not to surround myself with to really help drive the success.
Love this. You're speaking my language. I am like, so many people, solopreneurs or small business owners, they DIY. And the challenge is that one, there's a limit, a cap on how big your business can be. And two, it does affect, like, if you hadn't bought it, who knows if your dad would have found another buyer, because it does require an owner operator, right? It isn't just somebody who can buy the business. So you set this up, you made a lot of changes. I know that change isn't easy. So can you walk us through like an example or two of what did letting go actually look like in those early days? If you chose one of those business areas where you did leverage somebody, what did it look like to figure out who to bring in, what to bring in, how to task them, how to oversee them? What did that look like?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. This is actually fun to talk about, knowing, what drives your message and your listeners and what they strive to understand. I think for years I treated delegation as like handing off tasks that I didn't want to do. Right. And the breakthrough for me was realizing that delegation is about transferring ownership. So, for example, when we brought the creative director on, when I gave him real ownership of creative and production, and then I brought our head of client success and strategy on and gave him the real ownership of client success, it didn't just free up my time, right? Like I was kind of referencing to earlier. The realness of it is actually what got better.
Hmm.
Things that I would have done 90% myself were now being done 100% by people who owned those areas and owned that work. And I think there's a difference between delegating tasks and delegating outcomes, right? Or outputs. And so when you give someone the ability to own something, it can be nerve wracking. It can be, it can cause anxiety because, as most entrepreneurs know, if I want something done, I just get it done myself, right? And just get it done and move on. And that felt impossible to me for that initial phase because of my personality. I think the Colby profile, I had a 7 for fact finding, which means my instinct is to dig deep and be very specific and specify things and research every angle before moving forward. So delegation,
You
literally, it felt
stuff.
physically uncomfortable. You know, I could feel it in my gut at times because it meant I had to release control of the details or over control over the details. You know, I think the strength finders maximizer strength like made that even worse. You know, I saw and I knew what excellent looked like, and I didn't really maybe trust anyone else to be able to hit that bar.
Hmm.
So, you know, what changed was getting, you know, that feedback and that data on my own wiring and the way that I thought and operated, and accepting the fact that my job wasn't to just do the work in an excellent way. It was to build a team that could. I think that, you know, the end goal for me, if I can, if we can get this thing to continue to grow as we have for the last few years, fortunately for us, you know, is this thing's going to be its own living, breathing organism that I'm not going to have to, you know, plug into the wall to get going every morning, or I'm not going to have a, you know, weekly or a monthly hoorah type meeting and all of that. It's going to have a lot of the inner workings, the processes, the forms of delegation, when, where, all of those details, and have people here owning those processes from start to finish. So it was at first very, very nerve wracking, you know, very uneasy feeling. But had I not gone through that and tried to maybe work through how I felt uncomfortable about stuff, we certainly wouldn't be where we are today. There's a phrase out there, and I'm not good at memorizing quotes and stuff, but there's something out there that is specific to, you know, when you're uncomfortable, you're growing, right? And when you're not uncomfortable, that's when you start to become complacent. That was really driving those moments of that gut feeling like, oh my gosh, you know, if I do this, what's going to happen? You know, how well is the client going to receive it? Or are we going to get it done on time? You know, and I'm just like, roll the dice. Like there's risk in business. There's risk in what we do on a day-to-day basis. But I feel if you're calculated with it, again, given some of my personality traits and you communicate well. The communication is a big part of maybe alleviating some of that uncomfortability with delegating things, whether that communication is in written form or verbal or in person or virtual. Our
Hmm.
industry is super collaborative. We do better when we're all together in person. So I'd really tried to make it a point as we had staff that were some remote, some hybrid, some in office, to really make it a point to bring everybody together in person and communicate my vision and communicate how I was planning to make change so that everybody knew it was coming. It wasn't just they came in on a Monday and now there's a new
Right.
guy and he's running the show and he's responsible for these things. So and certainly levels of uncomfortability, but you know, was able to work through that. And now delegation feels a lot more natural. It feels a lot more familiar. And you know, through my ability to do it, it's, you know, it's been seen by the staff, and the staff is also doing it in certain ways as we continue to grow our team.
If you're running a growing company and still handling too many operational details yourself, there's a better way forward. The Delegate or Die checklist shows you the exact tasks that drain leadership bandwidth and the simple changes that recover 15 to 30 plus hours a week. Download it free at workergenics.com/scale-smart. Now let's get back to the episode.
As the agency evolved and you had this delegation, and you also, had a very data driven backbone, because, I've heard that from you. You had your retention rate, things like that. We often need to build systems and accountability in place for that delegation, for that data, without killing the creativity that made the agency successful in the first place. So, how did you build out systems and accountability while preserving the creativity?
So, as you said before, change is hard, right? And most people, I think that as we're wired as humans, when something changes, we always go like, oh no, you know, and we kind of go on the negative side of things. We don't like change, right? Change was a big part of it. And it was kind of through that communication that I had to say to everyone, hey guys, you know, we're going to change some things. And it's not because things are broken. It's not because, you know, we missed a deadline or this creative piece didn't hit what we wanted it to hit, or we've got clients that are upset with us or vendors busting down our door because they're not getting paid. Like none of that stuff was the reason for the change. The change needed to happen with the future state in mind. And as I communicated what that future state, was in my mind, I also gave the team their own input and their own time to be able to collectively share and offer even ideas and thoughts about what the future state looked like to get buy-in, right?
Hmm.
you know, we would not be who we are as a business and as a brand. We would not have the clients that we have. We would not be able to do the work that we do if it weren't for our people. And I'm a big believer in being a servant leader to our team, whether that's here at work or if I'm, coaching one of my boys, sports teams, being there to support what the staff needs and communicating with them as I'm going through my journey was impactful. I think it allowed people to almost have a sense of ownership to things as we started to, develop more SOPs and processes for the teams and how work was flowing between departments. But there's a variety of things that happened, right? Like I implemented more of a structured meeting rhythm for the team. And this was purely based on, a lot of things that I had read and different, thought leaders I had watched around, this space. There's a book written called Death by Meeting. It's Michael and Coney, if I'm not mistaken, but it's a fictional story written around like a video game company startup, right? And as I read through it, I'm like, my gosh, there's so many similarities I could draw from this fictional story to how we've operated here at the agency. Meetings were never something that my father had regularly in place. And, yes, you can have meetings to have meetings and totally waste time, but we needed more structure to connecting as a team and as people within our operation. And so through some learning, some learnings and some reading and some self-education, I implemented kind of a meeting playbook for our firm where the different departments will have 10 to 15 minute daily stand-ups. No note taking. You're literally standing up. Some of our team, they go on walks every morning together to do theirs. Some do it within the office over the coffee or the water cooler or the TV in the conference room. But those 15-minute meetings are intended to just be, hey, what do you got going on today? Do you have any speed bumps or hurdles in front of you? And, what are your goals to get things for, by the end of the day type stuff? And so the department started to have those on a day-to-day basis, Monday through Friday. We implemented weekly tactical meetings, which brought our whole team together. I facilitate those meetings. And those weekly tacticals, we come prepared, but there's no agenda. So we do kind of a lightning round around the room. Everybody gets kind of 60 to 90 seconds to talk about what they're working on. And if they've got anything that is prohibiting them or slowing them down with the work that they're trying to do. Like if you've got a gripe about something or if you've got a need about something, that's the meeting to bring it to because you've got the collective ears of the rest of the team. We go around the lightning round and then we live in person determine, okay, what are our agenda items? What are the most important things that were shared? We pick 2 or 3 of those, sometimes 4, and then we tactfully talk about those things and assigning, next steps or action items coming out of the meeting for people who are responsible for those things to address. And we come to an agreement at the end of the meeting. Okay, these are 2 or 3 things that we felt needed help today. Chad, we need your help with this. Okay, cool. I commit to getting that done by Thursday. Steve, you're responsible for getting this done to achieve this concern, and that's due by Monday morning, and whatever it might be. So coming out with literal things, specific things. Those things then go into Monday.com, our project management tool, and everyone's got visibility. There's accountability that people are being held to. And that has been a nice rhythm for us. And then we have monthly strategic meetings, which are a little bit longer, once a month. And those are meant to address more strategic level, not tactful, ground level, week to week stuff, but strategic level stuff could have to do with our operations. It could have to do with a specific client. But then those monthly strategics are kind of run the same way. We come into those with an agenda. Oftentimes people will bring a topic to a weekly tactical that requires more than just a couple minutes of conversation and delegation. It requires strategic thought, strategic input. And so we'll shelf those topics for the monthly strategic. That'll develop our agenda. We'll run through that. And that's that. And then we do quarterly, what have been internal for the longest of time that last year we switched to offsite. So we take the team offsite for half a day, do some quarterly stuff. That's our highest level of talk. We're talking about revenue goals. We're talking about new clients that have come in. We're talking about maybe some challenging accounts that need a little bit more love or TLC, those types of things. And so that meeting rhythm and implementing that was a huge way for me to begin to kind of build out that infrastructure for delegation and how to delegate. I talked to you about the SOPs. I mentioned SOPs before, right? Everybody knows how the hell to get their work done around here. Like that's not a question. The question was, as we continue to scale, we bring new people on, how quickly can we get them up to speed with our operation without wasting time and having to, walk them through, the redundant everyday requirements for a particular, responsibility or for a particular project. We have those things documented.
Right.
The onboarding process is that much easier for the new team members that come on board. It takes responsibility off of the existing team to have to do a lot more hand holding and babysitting and things like that. That was another thing that we implemented early on that has really helped with a lot of the delegation as we.
Mhm. There's so many insights for our listeners there. I know you hit on a couple things that are really what I see as keys to success when people work with Workogenics and with our executive assistants. And that's the meetings, the face to face, right? I'm like, if key to success is having, 20-minute, 30-minute block every week to get face to face between client and
Yeah.
executive assistant like that. And then
Yes.
I also love Monday.com. Monday.com rules my world, but whatever project management system, having stuff in that project management system is key when you're scaling and delegating and it's not just a solopreneur doing that work.
Yes. Like Monday.com is a great tool. Any PM system is a good tool, if you use it the right way. And I feel like delegation doesn't really work in chaos, right? And if you don't have a way of managing the work and keeping things organized and having the ability to go in and take a look at where something might be and it's in the life, the timeline of its project or whatever, it can be chaotic, right? We had to build that structure first. When we handed things off, people had the map. They understood what had to happen when that thing was handed off versus, okay, I'm delegating this responsibility to you now. And 3 hours later, Adrienne, you walk into my office and you say, hey, Chad, I can do this, but how have we
Right.
done this
Exactly.
before? So having processes documented, having SOPs and even the meetings gives people an opportunity to come to the table and voice their opinion and voice question and things like that. I think one of the biggest culture killers is ambiguity. So you give people the map, you define what success looks like, and then you let them find their own path to get there. I might as well stay an owner operator if I'm literally going to pave all of the roads and maintain those roads, right? And make sure that there's, stoplights and stop signs and all of the directionals
Right.
that need to be on those roads. That's fine. My thought was I'm going to lay the crusher run layer of these roads, right? And give people the ability to pave those roads themselves while also dipping into the bucket of the paver to pave a new path based on what they want to get to, right? So kind of a cheesy analogy, and I apologize for that, but I do believe that ambiguity is a killer for culture and it's a killer for growth. And let's be honest, there are definitely people and the styles in which people work where they you try and stay under the radar a little bit, right? And try and maybe not, feel like, make yourself feel like you're totally or totally dependent on having to get this done. Well, maybe my other teammates are involved in this, or maybe I can get them kind of pull into this and help me. That's all fine and dandy, but that ambiguity really makes things difficult from a delegation perspective. So defining things, processing and documenting things, giving people that map and that end goal, and then allowing them the opportunity to pave their own ways is a big way that we've done it.
Love it. And last question as we wrap up. For the owner listening right now who knows that they're holding on to too much, what's one thing they could delegate this week that would make an immediate difference?
I don't know if I can answer that. I would probably say before choosing what that one thing is, because I said before, the easy thing is to say, well, all right, look at all this list of things I got to get to. What do I not want to do? That's usually what we do, right? I would challenge that to say, don't do that. Take the rest of this week. Don't delegate anything this week. Take some time this week. Block out an hour or 2 hours if you can to learn about yourself. Take some self-assessments, right? Try and uncover maybe some aspects or some angles to your personality that you may not know are there. And those assessments will tell you those things. And then based on that, apply what you learn to that list of things that, continues to build every single day, and identify maybe some of the things that don't align with your strengths and the things that are a major part of your personality. And then ask yourself, who can do this? Not how am I going to get this done, but who can do this? I'm not as good at it. And think about your team. Think about if you're a solopreneur and maybe you've got some external resources or other people, maybe even advisors you've leaned on. Go to them with that work. Talk to them about how you can, get that work done with a who versus how you need to figure out how to get that done before Friday at 5 or 6 o'clock. So yeah,
Right.
don't delegate anything to anybody else this week. Delegate your own time to learning more about yourself, your strengths, and where, you need support, and then align those learnings with what you need to get done to determine, okay, here are 2 or 3 things that I could go to Adrienne on or Chad on or Sally on to help me get those things.
Yeah, I love that. I always counsel people along those same lines that it's not just the time something takes, it's like the energy, right? Is it something that gives you energy or something that
Big
drains your
time.
energy? Like what you're
Yeah.
saying with your strengths and really trying to delegate off those things that drain your energy are important.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
Chad, for anyone who's connected with your story and wants to learn more about your agency or follow what you're doing, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah. So if you wanted to learn more about our shop, our website is SRBADV, the first 3 letters of advertising, SRBADV.com. If you'd like to connect with me on personally, would love to, love to chat. I'm on LinkedIn, Chad G. Bauer. You can find me on there. You can connect with me, shoot me a DM. Be happy to help support however I can.
Love that. Thank you so much, Chad. And this entire conversation was a good reminder that growth usually starts with the operator. And it's not just the strategy, but the willingness to delegate and build something that can run without everything sitting on your shoulders. And honestly, that's where execution breaks down for a lot of leaders. The vision is there, the plan is there, but the follow through just gets buried in the day to day and all of the obligations. And that's why we here at Workogenics provide these ultimate executive assistants who help keep the details, communication, and momentum moving behind the scenes. You can check that out at workogenics.com. And Chad, thanks again for being here. And thanks everyone for listening. See you on the next one.